with Google to serve their proposed data center in Hermantown. Just quick background for those of you that I have not met. I've been with Minnesota Power about 18 years, different roles. I've done wind farm development, wind farm construction. I've managed some of our power plants, been oversight of some of our engineering groups. And my current role as Vice President of Customer Experience and also our Engineering Services Group includes responsibility for all of our customer accounts, large, small government buildings, and from call centers to economic development, key account management. Engineering Services includes the engineering team that we have that helps maintain all of our electrical and power generating facilities, as well as construction of new facilities, new power plants, and new power lines, etc. So, just a little background about myself. So the next slide I'd like to cover is just a background about Minnesota Power as a brief overview. We are an investor-owned, rate-regulated electric utility headquartered here in Duluth, Minnesota, serving northeastern Minnesota for over 120 years. We have approximately 150,000 customers, and we serve some of the largest industrial customers in the country, and that's one of the things that makes us unique, and that's in terms of our energy sales. I included a pie chart on the slide to show that about 3/4 of our sales today are to industrial customers, whereas your typical or average electric utility, that's about 25% or 1/4. So we already have a lot of experience serving large customers. That's why we like to include the map of all of our customers and largest customers in the territory, along with the locations of our employees across the Duluth, Hermantown, Bouquet area, and up on the Iron Range, and down in the Little Falls area. In addition to our retail service, we also provide service to 14 municipal customers in northeastern Minnesota. Next slide. So I wanted to ground us in a few of the many regulations that we work through from electric service. So I'll start with a federal regulation that's important in this situation. So approximately 30 years ago, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, they passed order number 888, which specifies that there is open access to the electric transmission system, and that is a requirement upon utilities when a new customer wants to connect to the transmission system, or a new electric generator wants to connect to the electric system, that we have a process in place to facilitate their interconnection requests. We study the impacts of what that request might be, and then if the generator or customer wants to connect to the system, they sign an agreement to pay for the costs associated with them connecting to the electric system. A couple of Minnesota regulations in place, and these go back 50 plus years, Minnesota has a regulated service territory, and that created geographic service territory where regulated utilities have both the right and also the obligation to serve customers. Said another way, when a customer moves into our area, or somebody relocates, they buy a house or rent an apartment in our area, put a business in our area, we are obligated to serve that customer. So we not only get the privilege, but we also have the obligation. At the same time, in the 70s, they passed regulation to empower and create the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. And that is the commission that's been vested with the power to regulate the investor-owned utilities and other utility aspects in the state. So almost everything we do goes through the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission before it comes out with an approval or a modification or even a denial in terms of how we serve our customers. Next slide, please. So Minnesota Power, I want to talk about a few of the highlights of the agreement that we put in place with Google. The electric service for this facility will be under our existing regulated rate structure that is in compliance with the Minnesota law that ensures existing customers do not pay for costs associated with connecting and serving a new large customer. I'll talk a little bit more about our existing rate structure and also a little bit more about the recent legislation that was passed in the state of Minnesota. As I mentioned from FERC's open access transmission order, any new power that is needed to serve the facility is going to be funded by Google, and that ensures that we maintain the same reliability that we have today across our electric grid for all other customers. The agreement in place says that we will develop additional renewable and battery storage facilities, or approximately 700 megawatts of clean energy resources to help serve the load. And there's commitments from Google to facilitate that, to ensure that we're not increasing costs on any of our existing customers. In addition to those requirements, Google's agreed to contribute $5 million to bolster Minnesota Power's energy affordability and efficiency programs for our low to moderate income residential customers. And as part of the 2025 Minnesota legislation, they are obligated to fund millions annually to the statewide energy efficiency and weatherization program. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd provide a little more detail about what an electric service agreement is. And that is a formal contract that we enter into with our large customers for electric service, and it outlines the terms and conditions specific to that customer, their site, their location, certain minimum commitments they might have, and length of agreements in place. We've used this extensively. We have over a dozen of these agreements in place today with these large customers that we already serve, such as our taconite mines, paper mills, pipeline customers, etc. The Minnesota Public Utilities Commission does have a role in this, in that they need to review and approve electric service agreements to ensure that there's fairness and compliance with state laws. And that includes the recently passed 25 legislation that's specific to new large load interconnection and ensuring that the costs are not borne by existing customers. Our regulatory process will begin when we submit a filing to the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission seeking approval for the agreement that we've entered into with Google, and we expect to submit that in the next coming weeks. Through that process, the Public Utilities Commission will create a docket, and that is a part where we can have public input, and there's a robust public process that public comments can happen, and that stakeholders can intervene or engage in that process. As part of creating the public record, the Public Utilities Commission will consider upon making its decision. The MPUC will evaluate the rates, the reliability, and ultimately make a determination if the agreement is in the public interest. They always imply and put in place ongoing monitoring to ensure that any commitments in that agreement are met over the life of the agreement. Next slide. I want to speak a moment about customer protections. As I mentioned, Minnesota Power has been serving industrial customers for much of its 120-year history, and we've had existing mechanisms in place when new large customers come to our system, or even if an existing customer grows, such that we protect our existing customers from any increase in costs. We've had something in our rate book for decades around a large power surcharge that speaks just to that, and that it would protect other customers by us charging a surcharge to a new large customer that increased load by 50 megawatts or more if it were to cause an increase in cost. So that's something we have in our existing rate book. I mentioned that the FERC open access component for our transmission system, that process has been in place for 30 years to ensure that any new grid infrastructure required to interconnect a large customer or large load to the transmission system would be required. That customer would be required to pay for that. And that's regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. In 2025, the Minnesota legislature passed a law that further ensured that costs associated with serving new large customers of 100 megawatts or more cannot be passed on to other utility customers. So they put specific assurances in place that further cements that any agreement that's brought forward to the Public Utilities Commission would have to demonstrate that costs would be the same or lower for existing customers. This ensures fairness and protects our existing residential, commercial, and industrial customers, while enabling the economic growth that we want to see in our region. Next slide, please. I want to speak a moment about the benefits of load growth on a regulated electric system. And what I have on the slide is a chart that is from a study that was recently performed by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and the Granville Group. And they published many findings that showed retail electric rates are driven by many factors. They're driven by energy policy decisions of state legislatures. They're driven by system investments that are required to maintain the system, replace aging equipment, modernize the system, different types of generation that are chosen to serve customers, from renewable generation to fossil generation and fuel impacts. And they also highlighted the impact of customer load changes. And what this plot shows is 50 states that have had various degrees of load growth or load loss over the last 5 years from 2019 to 2024. And what you see is a strong correlation that as there is load growth off to the right on the chart, you see rates, inflation adjusted rates, that they are lower than if there is load loss or load shrink. Or if you go to the left side of the axis, you see that rates tend to go up. Again, there's many factors involved from energy policy and other things, but in general, increasing load on a regulated electric system results in the same or lower rates for customers. And we've had our own experience with that at Minnesota Power. If I go back more than a decade to a time where we had a rate request before the Public Utilities Commission in Minnesota, because we had increasing costs, investments, but we also had one of the Taconic mines was idle on the Iron Range. In the course of us working through the rate case, that mine restarted, and it allowed us to lower our rate request in 2017 because the new load came back onto the system. And much like things that you may contemplate in the operation of the city, we have a high fixed cost, fixed asset system with lots of power lines and generators and buildings and a fleet of line trucks and line workers to help maintain that reliability. And when we grow the system, we're able to spread those fixed costs across more customers, more payers, which ultimately helps reduce costs for other customers. Next slide. In summary, our electric service agreement that we've executed with Google is a regulated and transparent agreement that protects existing customers, and it will be heard before the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission through their process to determine if ultimately if it's in the public interest. We believe this agreement supports job creation, tax revenue, and economic development in the region, and that the state law in place, in addition to our existing protections that Minnesota Power has had for decades in our rate book, it will enable that no rate increases will occur because of this new load for existing customers. And we believe that it will provide a strong economic development for the region while enabling us at Minnesota Power to ensure that we can continue to provide safe, reliable, and affordable electric service to our customers. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I have a couple.
Okay.
The battery facilities you talked about, where would those be located? Are they on the data center site or are they elsewhere?
Thank you for the question. So we will be determining through a process of where we want to site those facilities. They will be system resources. So similar to how we site a lot of our generating and future energy storage facilities today, they can be located throughout the region. We have fossil generation in Cohasset and Aurora, Great Lakes area. We have renewable generation across the Iron Range and in North Dakota. We're building solar facilities today up in Cohasset and down in the Little Falls area. So we'll be going through a robust siting process to determine what the best ultimate location is for those. But they will not necessarily be at the site of that.
Well, as a follow-up, when you mentioned fossil generation, is that coal-fired?
We currently have both coal-fired and natural gas-fired fossil generation to help maintain the reliability when our renewable resources are not available, such as one thing that's very important that we try to manage through the electric system is that electricity is something that's travels at the speed of light, and it is consumed at the moment it's generated, and balancing that and storing that is somewhat of a challenge. And so as we've integrated and been successfully integrated, I'll say up to 60% renewable energy content for our customers, we still have to have facilities in place to balance when the wind is not blowing or the sun is not shining, or we have drought conditions for our hydroelectric units, such that we can still provide that instantaneous delivery of electricity to our customers at all hours.
I have one other on my top of my tongue, but I can't remember right now. I think that's all I have.
You made a note, or you mentioned ongoing monitoring by the MPCU of projects like the proposed asset. What penalties are there in place for that? Is it just fines if they violate the agreement, or how does that work?
Thank you for the question. So, when we work through dockets with our utilities commission, we often have ongoing compliance. And then through that process, they would be able to assess penalties, fines, and if either we as a utility aren't in compliance with serving our customers, or if there's a customer that's not fulfilling its obligation, they would work through what the appropriate mechanism was to ensure that they are.
So they're monitoring Minnesota Power and the customer?
Correct.
On that graph, you don't happen to know which bubble is Minnesota, do you?
I apologize, I don't have the specifics of which bubble is Minnesota. I do know it's that North Dakota has experienced significant load growth over the past 5-6 years. And their customers have benefited across the state.
As opposed to California, which has seen a small amount of decrease in load, but the rate has gone up significantly.
That's correct. And in the study, and I put the link in the materials if you wanted to look at all the materials, they do some case studies upon, I know California, North Dakota, and I believe also Maine, and maybe a couple others that highlight just how much of the rate increase in California is due to energy policy, loss of load, and vice versa for North Dakota.
I remember my question. One of the issues, of course, is emergency generators on the site, sound of them, et cetera. Do you have to guarantee a certain amount of percentage of energy, 99.9%, or what? I don't live too far from the site, so I know that my lights aren't on very much, but what is the power reliability that you have to ensure to the customer?
So thank you for the question. So we aim to provide perfect power, and when I say it, we provide near perfect reliability because storms happen and equipment at times can fail. And for our residential electric customers, what that means is 99.39 and 7, so it's about 2 to 4 hours a year on average, and that includes storms that our residential electric customers experience outages. Our transmission interconnected customers, they're much closer to that near perfect when they're connected to a large transmission system, and those would include our existing mines and paper mills, et cetera. They are connected directly to the transmission system. And when you look at the reliability of that system, it's often less than 1 or 2 minutes, if not no interruptions at all, just because of the robustness of the high voltage transmission system.
Being near the station, that probably even makes it better yet.
That's improvement. Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the time.
Master plan sequential projects is essentially a hybrid of an EAW or environmental assessment worksheet and an EIS or environmental impact statement. So what this does is it breaks it into 2 portions. There's the large scale scoping document that begins the process for this AUAR. And so that is the first initial step with this. Once that first stage is done, then we actually go into the draft and the final AUAR process. So in the past, since early 25, Broad has provided those services to the city, both in the review of the large-scale scoping document and that draft AUAR and final AUAR. Obviously, those things had been reviewed last year and had been accepted by the City Council back on October 6th of last year. So now, since that time, the project proposal of Harmony Group LLC, which is the Google One subsidiary, has developed additional project design details and compiled additional analysis and the master plan for this light industrial development, which includes a data center and related infrastructure associated with that. So as such, the city of Hermantown and the project proposal decided to voluntarily update the AUAR. So in turn, Kimberly Bourne is the preparing consultant for this AUAR document, with Ron Chernow providing those third-party review services along with city staff for that document per se. So it's anticipated that this process will take approximately 7 months, and as I mentioned, it's going to be broken into 2 parts. There's the first step that we start with, which is a large-scale scoping document, and then after that, the formal AUAR document. So what I'd like to do is just kind of briefly touch on each one of those portions that way, so council members of the audience can understand those better. So in the large-scale scoping document, it starts with the drafting of the order of the scoping document. The city of Hermantown is a responsible government unit, that's going to be referred to as the RGU associated with that. So we actually, we have a resolution come forward for the draft of that. So this document will outline items such as the geographic boundary associated with it, the development scenarios associated with it, and the environmental issues, which is a list of factors to be evaluated, such as water quality, infrastructure needs, and habitat preservation associated with it. So once that draft large-scale scoping document is prepared, it goes up for public comment period, which is a 30-day public process, which basically public and state agencies can suggest either additional development scenarios or specific environmental issues that should be addressed as part of that draft AUAR process. So after that comment period, the large scoping document is revised. There's then a final order review from the city that we will adopt that scoping document and then initiate the AUAR process at that point. So then we dive into the AUAR document. So what that does, now the RGU as the city again, we adopt the order to study this area as an AUAR. So that document is prepared, which analyzes the impacts based on the maximum building footprint and infrastructure needs associated with the development. So what it does, it looks at a worst case scenario for that land area associated with it. Once again, once that draft AUAR is prepared and then published, there's a 30-day public review process. Once again, members of the public as well as state agencies can comment on during that 30-day period. Those comments are then taken in, and then what happens is a finalization of the AUAR happens along with a mitigation plan. The different environmental things or issues that come up, how are those going to be mitigated as part of this project plan? Those are all associated in that AUAR document. Finally, then the city would adopt that final AUAR document and the mitigation plan associated with it. So once again, we anticipate that's going to be approximately about a 7-month process. So right now, I'd like to speak a little bit on a projected schedule associated with that as we continue to move forward. So generally in March into April here, we'll be looking at the draft AUAR and that large scoping document preparation. So those documents will start being submitted to the city, as well as the consultant for review, comments associated with that. Anticipate the publication of that large-scale scoping document with the EQB, which is the Environmental Quality Board, that's one of the requirements, and that initiates the public comment period. That's generally going to be in late March, early April associated with that. So generally, we'll probably run through about the end of April for that. At that stage, it then comes before the City Council for the acceptance of the decisions associated with that large-scale scoping document, approximately late May or early May associated with that. And then at that point, the preparation of the draft AUAR happens. So that time period would then be running essentially with the end of the large scoping document is in May and then June 26th this year. Once again, at that point, that draft AUAR is published with the EQB, once again starting that 30-day public comment period as well as state agencies for that. Those comments would essentially come out between the June and July time period. And then the City Council, essentially at the end of that period, approximately the end of July or so, would then accept that draft AUAR document and then order the final preparation of the AUAR document. That final AUAR would happen then obviously July and August of 26th, with the publication into the EQB being essentially probably mid to late August and into September that way. And then finally, the city council would look at potential acceptance of the decision for the final AUAR document approximately sometime in September of 2026. So this is kind of a broad brush sort of schedule that we anticipate in both the preparation of that large-scale scoping document as well as the draft AUAR and final AUAR. A fairly robust process that involves city staff, Ron's consultant, as well as Kimberly Warren as the consultant preparing that AUAR document. So as I said, Ron would provide that third-party technical review of all these documents, work along with city staff, and then basically get these comments on to Kimberly Warren as the preparer of these documents. So we can continue to move throughout this process, publications into the EQB, initiation of public comment, and just to continue to move throughout it over the next few months. With that, I'd like to, if there's any questions that you may have regarding the process or the timelines associated with it, be happy to answer those.
I have one question. On your memo here, under adoption, it says city council adopts the final AUAR and mitigation plan. What is the mitigation plan?
So the mitigation plan, there'll be different, basically comments that we receive from, let's say, the DNR, that there's questions about either wetlands or streams, etc. How are these comments going to be addressed as part of the final plans associated with the proposed data center site? So the mitigation plan identifies how those will be addressed. And those become essentially part of this document and requirements as this project moves forward, that this is how those issues will be addressed and mitigated.
We did not get that in the first AUAR, correct?
There was a mitigation
There
plan
was,
associated with it, yes, sir.
So what happens to the AUAR that we've already accepted? No longer applicable?
I hear you talk, okay. So this is essentially, there's two ways to handle it. We could have either done an initial update to the existing AUAR, or what we've decided to do is essentially start over again, start the process over. So it's a document that's out there, but it is no longer valid for the site. This new AUAR will take precedence over that.
Are we expecting it to be more detailed? Is it more project variables that are known to make this AUAR more accurate and complete than the first one?
Yes, that was the rationale by doing a complete new AUAR versus the municipal update. So there's more information that's become available as this project has moved forward over the months. Obviously, with the initial AUAR, there was a discussion about potential data center. And now, yes, there are. So we're getting into much deeper, trying to dive into the details much further.
Member Shea, Council, there's been a lot of discussion about why the city has decided to use, why the city as the RGU, the responsible government unit, has decided to use the AUAR versus the EIS or the EAW. And so we as staff thought it would be important to kind of outline that for you. So there's a letter that is attached to the memo that kind of outlines the thinking and the rationale behind the selection of the AUAR. So as Mr. Johnson mentioned, more additional details and project details and design details, along with additional analysis has come out as a part of this process. And so we voluntarily decided, as with project proposer, to reevaluate the environmental review. We're moving forward we're proposing to move forward with the AUAR, and we did this based on 3 key elements when reviewing this. First of all, it's a master plan technology campus, and that master plan is a significant size in campus and geographic area, and it will be built out in sequential parts, and each individual part being public phase is likely to meet or exceed the threshold for an environmental impact statement, which would disqualify it then from the EAW, which is why we did not move forward with the EAW process. But the master plan has a prolonged development timeline, again consisting of sequential actions, with full build-out expected to take 8 to 10 years. And with the primary land use involving technological elements, hopefully there's an elements, I haven't seen that in most plans. Evolving elements that are anticipated to alter the site design and the building design and the mechanical designs, all of the elements related to buildings throughout the extended development timeline. Those are the three key pieces we looked at when deciding which environmental review document to use. I think it's important now to kind of note that the AUAR is not a less rigorous analysis. The AUAR is mandated by state statute to address substantially the same issues as an EIS and use the same process and procedures similar in effect to those of an EIS process. So it is not less rigorous. The state statute actually mandates that the AUAR provide for the same level of analysis comparable to that of the EIS. So it does meet, the AUAR does meet the mark of an EIS. The state adopted the AUAR process as a means to review incremental impacts that accumulate from a series of sequential projects in a certain geographic area. And so this development plan fits the AUAR's intended purpose by being a master plan development campus, not to be all built at once, but rather being composed of 4 distinct sequential phases built over 8 to 10 years. Further, the AUAR is provided in state statute by the state for RGUs to use as a substitute form of environmental review. It is to be used in lieu of an EIS, addressing the same issues and utilizing the same procedures. Further, staff felt comfortable with the AUAR because unlike an EIS, which only identifies measures that could eliminate or minimize any adverse effects, a mitigation plan, as Councilor Geisler had asked about, not only identifies the measures, but it will impose them on future development. So it actually requires that they must incorporate mitigation measures into the development process. It not only identifies them, but it mandates they adhere to them. In summary, the reason we selected the AUAR as the appropriate environmental review, it's a data center campus with the land use being an allowable land use for AUAR. The large AUAR, which the large AUAR has the rigor of an EIS as required by Minnesota state statute. The legislature designed the AUAR to provide the flexibility and efficiency for a phased master plan campus expected to change over time. And lastly, the AUAR studies the potential environmental impacts of the worst case scenario of the proposal and creates a plan that enforces it rather than simply identifying the mitigation or reduction of the potential impacts. So that is why. And the last thing I'll say that to the Ron contract, the funding mechanism for the Ron contract is actually the escrow that the developer has put in place. So there are no city funds being expended for that contract. They are being paid for, as they have been for this entire process, by the developer. So certainly, there's also a quick, at Mr. Erickson's idea of putting a table together to easily reference. There's also that table that kind of gives a side-by-side comparison of the 3 different environmental review processes. But other than that, Mr. Johnson and I will happily take any questions you might have on the contract itself or the process.
Again, this resolution is simply approving a contract with Ron to provide technical expertise for the scoping and then for the preparation of the AUAR. This is not the scoping document. This is not the AUAR. It's a contract to put in place a third-party review of those processes.
Questions? Kimberly Horn is producing the AUAR, correct?
Mayor Boucher, Councilor Geisler, that is correct. So typical process is where the developer hires a consultant to complete the AUAR. Then the AUAR is provided to us because it is our document. We own that as the city, as the RGU. It's our document. And then our third-party expert in partnership with city staff review that document and make sure that it meets our mark and make sure that we feel comfortable that it actually hits what the state statute requires in terms of rigor. And So Jamie Horn puts together the draft of it, we review it and bring it together, in partnership with MNPower.
And then, I appreciate all the work that you did here and the chart. I think that was helpful for me to understand. A couple follow-up questions. In the situation of an EIS, if it does not require a mitigation plan, how do we get from an EIS to a construction project to, to create a plan of what we're gonna do?
Mayor Shea, Councilor Geisler, the EIS is essentially approved. The difference is that the state becomes, the RGU in an EIS versus the local government. But it's approved only identifying measures. They still have to meet all the marks of the permits, they still have to acquire the permits that, from the different state agencies, as they do with the AUAR. The thing with the mitigation plan is that it provides specific, and mandatory guardrails, outside of the permits, that keeps it, and keeps everybody on the same page as the development plays out. So that, they still have to, as with an EIS and an AUAR, they still have to get the permits and adhere to the permits.
Two more questions. What happens if the courts say that, an EIS is required?
Mayor Boucher, Councilor Geisler, then we will do an AIS.
All this is scrapped. Okay. And then, in that regard, Mr. Ronchetti talked about it, but maybe John, if you could just remind everybody where the funds are coming for this project, or this specific thing, any engineering, attorneys, et cetera.
All our city expenses are being reimbursed by the developer.
Thank you.
And in fact, we are holding the money for that. This is not a situation where we incur the expense and then ask for reimbursement. We are holding money in escrow. And we do that typically when we get into, some larger development projects. What requires the developer to pay. We're going to incur expenses, you need to put money down, to pay for those upfront.
We've done with other developments.
Yeah, we've done that, I think we did that with Hotline, we did that with
Fleet Farm.
Fleet Farm, we did a couple of places.
All right, thank you.
And then at the end of, our agenda item, we did, just so you know,